He paid for her coffee without knowing who she was. The words struck with quiet cruelty. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your car has been declined." They were spoken softly, professionally, but to Camille hardly. They detonated in the center of the bustling cafe, like a grenade. Sharp, jarring. She blinked just once, but the polished composure she wore like armor cracked beneath the weight of those few syllables. If you believe in human kindness, miracles, and redemption, so stay tuned with us and subscribe. Because what will you witness in this story that will full of joy and happiness? So let's back to the story. She stood there, frozen in place beneath her expensive trench coat, designer heels digging slightly into the tiled floor, unable to believe what she'd heard. Her gaze, trained and controlled, snapped toward the payment terminal. "Could you please try again?" she asked, her voice tight but civil, an edge of unease sharpening her words. The barista hesitated. Another beep. Declined. Again. Camille's breath hitched. She glanced around as the crowd shifted impatiently behind her, commuters, earbuds in, watches checked, a growing wave of minor annoyance. No wallet. No backup card. Her phone, completely dead. Of all the mornings. Of all the moments. Why did it have to be now, when her meticulously orchestrated life unraveled, one thread at a time? "I'm terribly sorry," she murmured, the edge of embarrassment cutting into her polished calm. "I must have left my wallet upstairs. I work in the building. Could you hold the order just for a few minutes?" "I'm afraid we can't hold drinks during peak hours," the barista responded with gentle finality. A sigh from the line. A quiet, irritated mutter, "Come on," from a man 2 customers back, dressed in a tailored suit. No one recognized her, and oddly, that hurt more than she expected. Then a voice emerged from the din, low, steady kind. "I've got it." She turned, startled. A man had stepped forward, early to mid-30s, perhaps, wearing a weathered navy shirt, faded jeans, sneakers scuffed with time. In one hand, he held a cup of water, in the other a debit card. "It's just coffee," he said, his tone warm and effortless. "Happens to the best of us." Before she could protest, before she could even gather her thoughts, he tapped his card. The machine beeped. Approved. The barista offered a relieved smile. The line moved on. But Camille didn't. She stood rooted, her world tipped slightly off axis. "It wasn't necessary," she said softly, still dazed. "I know," the man replied with a small shrug. "But if it were me, I think you'd have done the same." He handed her the coffee. Their fingers didn't touch, but their eyes did, briefly, silently. A glance that reached deeper than names or roles or labels. For a split second, she felt utterly human. No title, no performance, just need and grace meeting it. The cup trembled slightly in her hand, a few drops of hot coffee splashing onto her pristine white blouse. "Of course," she murmured, without hesitation. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a napkin. He stepped forward, not too close, just close enough, and gently dabbed the stain near her collarbone. His touch was measured, respectful, the kind that knows precisely where the line is and doesn't cross it. "There," he said with quiet finality. "Almost gone." She looked up, meeting his gaze again. His eyes, deep brown, steady, held the weariness of someone who had carried burdens too long to show them, but not enough to be broken by them. He didn't know who she was. Not even a flicker of recognition. For the first time in years, Camille felt herself exhale. Not in defeat, but in release. "What's your name?" she asked as he turned to leave. He paused at the door, looking back. "Eli," he said. Then he was gone, slipping through the side exit like a breeze that came and went without asking for anything in return. She stood there, coffee in one hand, the napkin in the other. The ink from the receipt bled faintly into the fabric, like a quiet signature on a moment she wouldn't forget. No one had ever done that for her. Not because of her title, not because of what she could offer, but simply because. 10 minutes later, Camille stood in the elevator of Hartley and Mercer, ascending to the penthouse floor. Around her, sleek steel and tinted glass enclosed a world built on power, poise, and performance. But her mind wasn't on the markets. It wasn't on meetings. It was still downstairs, with a man named Eli. She tried to focus on her phone, on emails demanding her attention. But the image of him kept surfacing, not because he paid, but because of everything he didn't do. He didn't ask her name. He didn't linger for thanks. He didn't treat the moment like it owed him something. He simply gave and walked away. And something in her shifted. A quiet latch inside her, long rusted shut, clicked open. Camille Hartley didn't dwell on moments. Her life had no room for nostalgia or introspection. Her world moved forward, always forward. Decisions made, schedules stacked, emotions neatly managed. But that morning, as her heels echoed against the marble floor of Dalton Heights, she couldn't stop replaying the moment. Eli, a man who didn't look for leverage, didn't seek status, didn't care who she was. He simply helped and disappeared. It wasn't just the act. It was the grace in how he'd done it, the dignity of someone who saw her, not as a title or transaction, but as a person who needed a hand. Inside her office, she sank into her chair at the head of the long glass table. Her assistant Mallory had already prepared the day's agenda. 2 coffees rested near her. 1 oat milk, 1 black. Out of habit, Camille reached for the black. "Morning," Mallory said brightly. "Everything all right? You look thoughtful." Camille paused, fingers curled around the cup. She set it down. "I had an unexpected interaction this morning." "Bad." She turned to the window, the city still cloaked in early fog. "The opposite," she said. "Someone helped me. Didn't know who I was. Paid for my coffee. Walked away." Mallory raised a brow. "That's rare." Camille didn't respond. Her mind was drifting again, toward a man with gentle hands and no need for thanks. Later, she took an unfamiliar route through the lobby. She rarely used the front atrium, but something, instinct, perhaps, led her there. And she saw him, Eli Turner, near a maintenance cart, adjusting the mop handle with calm precision. He moved without pretense. Sleeves rolled, arms dusted with the sun's memory. He smiled briefly at the concierge, picked up a discarded cup near a planter, wiped down a handrail like it mattered. Camille watched from behind a marble column, her chest tight, with something she didn't have a name for. Would I have done the same? She didn't know, but she wanted to. Back in her office, curiosity overtook protocol. She opened the internal system and typed his name. Eli Turner, maintenance staff, contract worker, quiet, punctual, no complaints, no resume on file, just a name and a number. But it didn't make sense. His words, his bearing, his presence. This wasn't a man worn down by life. This was someone who had come to terms with something and chosen peace. She called out, "Mallory, pull up a list of former engineering applicants, those with gaps in history or incomplete files." There was a pause. All of them. Just the flagged ones. That evening, as the office emptied and silence reclaimed the hallways, Camille flipped through the stack of resumes, red pen in hand, searching. Then she saw it. Turner Elijah J., former senior systems engineer, 8 years at Veltec. Notable projects, QuantumNet, CloudBridge. Gap 3 years. Reason, personal leave. Application, rejected automatically. Scribbled margin note. Asterisk, no clear explanation. Skills outdated. Asterisk. But then, on the last page, a line in the additional comments section. Looking to re-enter the tech world at my own pace. Not looking for pity, just purpose. She stared at it. Veltec wasn't small. QuantumNet was brilliant, clean, efficient, forward-thinking. He hadn't boasted. He hadn't pleaded. Just asked for a chance to matter again. The next morning, Camille stood at the elevator, his file in her hands. "Mallory," she said, "cancel Thursday's consultant interview." "Which one?" "The tech consultant. Bring him to me. Directly. No panel. Just me." Mallory blinked. "That's not standard procedure." Camille looked her in the eye. "No, but he's not a standard man." She returned to her office. The folder remained unopened for 20 minutes. Not because of lack of time, but something deeper. Hesitation. A rare and foreign emotion. Her thumb grazed the manila cover. Finally, she opened it. The first page was plain. Outdated. Simple. But authentic. No buzzwords. No desperation. Just this. "After a personal hiatus, I'm looking to contribute again in the field I love. I don't expect pity or favors. I simply want the chance to earn what I've always valued, purpose and honest work." Camille read the words twice. Then she looked out over the city. Somewhere down there, Eli Turner was going about his day. Quietly, honorably, and she knew, without doubt, he wouldn't ask for anything, which is exactly why she was about to give him everything. She remembered those launches, the flawless deployments, the unseen triumphs, not the ones splashed across headlines, but the quiet back-end victories that only industry insiders truly appreciated. Eli Turner had been behind many of them, yet his resume wasn't littered with ego. No bolded job titles, no bloated adjectives, just dates, contributions, results. 8 years of quiet excellence, then a 3-year void. Camille turned to the final page. "Reason for leave, asterisk family matter. Will explain in interview if needed, asterisk asterisk asterisk." In red ink, across the margin, a single line of judgment. Gap too long. No explanation. Discard. Her eyes locked on that word. Discard. Like a worn-out object. Like something past usefulness. No call. No questions. Just a quiet erasure of the story behind the silence. The person behind the pause. She leaned back in her chair, fingers tapping slowly on the leather armrest, a growing ache tightening in her chest. Something was off. She turned to her computer, accessed the company's internal archive, searched the HR system. Then, almost against reason, driven by something more fragile, hope, perhaps, she opened a browser and typed his name, Eli Turner Veltec. Nothing at first. Then a press release. His name was nestled in a sea of engineers who helped stabilize a major network outage in the Northeast. A blog post followed, small mentions. Quiet respect. Then a buried link in a local news archive. Local engineer steps away after tragic loss. Her heart stilled. She clicked. The image loaded slowly. There he was. For years younger, but unmistakably him, standing before a modest roadside memorial. Candles flickered. A small child's photograph nestled among white roses. He wore a suit that hung loose on his frame. His hands were clasped in front of him, but his eyes, they were hollow, as if the soul behind them had dimmed. Camille didn't need to read the article. The headline told enough. His wife and son had died in a car crash. Days later, Eli had walked away from everything, and he never returned. Not until now. Her throat tightened. Camille wasn't one to cry. Not for articles. Not for tragedies packaged in clickbait. But this wasn't a story. This was a man. A man who had chosen silence over spectacle. A man who had rebuilt his life not in boardrooms, but on the ground floor of the very building he once might have owned. Because of a gap. Because of grief. Someone had stamped him with a single word: discard. No, not anymore. She reached for her pen. Bold black ink. She struck through the red line, and in its place, she wrote, "Priority candidate. CEO interview. Direct only." There was a knock at her door. "Come in," she said, her voice composed. Mallory poked her head in, holding 2 more files. "More consultant applications, if you still want them." Camille shook her head. "Set those aside. I've made my choice." Mallory blinked. "Already? You haven't even." I don't need to, Camille said, rising to her feet. I've read what matters. You want me to schedule a panel? No panel. No HR filter. Just him. Me. Thursday at 2. Mallory looked at the name on the file. This one was in the rejected pile. Camille's eyes didn't waver. Not anymore. That evening, as the city hummed below her, Camille sat alone in her office. She stared at the skyline and thought about how easily people's lives were reduced to gaps, bullet points, buzzwords, how often the world mistook silence for weakness. And then she thought of Eli, the man who had handed her a napkin and walked away, a man who had asked for nothing and offered something sacred in return: dignity, presence. And for the first time in a long while, Camille hardly felt like she wasn't just managing a company. She was leading one. She opened her planner, circled Thursday. Enter Eli Turner. Read him, not the resume. The elevator climbed slowly. Too slowly, Eli thought. He stood stiff in the corner, clutching a worn leather folder, the only one he owned that could pass as professional. It held his resume. Again, printed out not for show, but out of habit. A flicker of hope survived in him still. He had never been this high up in the building. His job usually ended on floor 5, between mop closets and recycling bins. The numbers ticked upward: 22, 23, 24. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped into a hallway that smelled of cedar and polish. Warm light spilled across real artwork. No framed quotes about teamwork or excellence. Just quiet elegance. A single door stood half open. A printed card beside it read, Eli Turner, 2 p.m. with CEO. He inhaled, exhaled, then knocked. Come in. The voice was familiar, yet different. Like a song he'd only ever heard in passing, now played in an empty room. He stepped in. The office was glass and light, sleek, modern, serene. 2 chairs faced one another, separated by a low table. A tray of tea sat between them, steam curling gently from 2 ceramic cups. Camille Hartley stood at the far window, silhouetted against the skyline. She turned. Mr. Turner, she greeted, her expression unreadable at first. Then warmth. Gentle. Earnest. Thank you for coming. Of course, he replied, voice quiet but steady. I have to admit, I didn't expect this. Neither did I, she said softly. He blinked, but she motioned for him to sit before questions could form. They sat. A moment passed, heavy but not uncomfortable. A silence that invited honesty. Camille spoke first. You were originally scheduled for a panel interview. That's protocol. But I asked for this instead. Just us. He tilted his head slightly. May I ask why? She met his gaze. Her eyes held depth. Panels read resumes. I wanted to read a person. He didn't smile, but his expression shifted, just slightly. A door, long locked, creaked open. She reached for the folder. I reviewed your work, Veltec, Halbert Systems, QuantumNet. Your projects speak volumes. But then there's the gap. He nodded. I didn't expect anyone to look past it. You wrote, asterisk, I'm not looking for pity, just purpose. Asterisk that stayed with me. He lowered his eyes, then met hers again. I met it. Would you be willing to tell me what happened? He hesitated. Then, slowly, he placed both hands on his knees. His fingers trembled slightly. I lost my wife and son. Car accident. 3 years ago. I stepped away to survive. Camille didn't say asterisk, I'm sorry. Asterisk instead, she nodded. Not in pity, in understanding. For a long time, he continued, I couldn't fix anything. I'd built systems worth millions, but I couldn't get out of bed. Couldn't make lunch without breaking. He drew a breath. Then I started cleaning. First, just my house. Then my friend's shop. Then office buildings. Floors. Windows. Simple things. Things I could fix when my heart was gone. Camille's throat tightened. She said nothing, but her eyes shimmered. When I was finally strong enough to return, Eli said, I realized the world didn't have a seat for me anymore. My skills had aged, and so had hiring managers. She set down her tea. You know you're overqualified for half the roles we posted. Yes. Then why apply? He smiled faintly. Because I wasn't trying to climb again. I just wanted to stand again. Silence again, but this time it carried weight. Mutual respect. Shared pain. Camille leaned back. I didn't bring you here to offer pity. I'm not in the business of saving people. Good, he said softly. Because I'm not looking to be saved. She smiled. Real. Unfiltered. I wanted to meet the man who gave me a coffee and a napkin, and asked for nothing. He looked down. It didn't feel like something I needed thanks for. But it was, she replied. Because for a moment, someone saw me. Not as a salary. Not as a CEO. Just as a human. He looked at her again, and for the first time, saw not the executive, but the woman. Steady, yes, but tired too. Not weak, just worn. She reached for a second folder. Sleek. Black. No red marks. This isn't for an entry-level role, she said. It's for lead systems consultant. Demanding. High stakes. But if you're ready, this is where you belong. Eli hesitated, then opened it. He read the offer. Looked up, stunned. You're serious? I am. You barely know me. No, she said gently. I know you better than most candidates I've ever hired. I've watched you fix what others ignore, carry what others can't name. That tells me more than any resume ever could. He closed the folder. I'll accept, he said, then paused. But on one condition. She raised a brow. Let me pay for the next coffee. Camille laughed, a soft, surprised sound. Deal. When Eli left the office, the city outside had shifted. The sun stretched across the marble floors, casting long golden shadows behind him. And for the first time in years, Eli Turner didn't feel like a man passing through doors that weren't meant for him. He felt like a man ready to build again. The offer letter sat on his kitchen table, unopened. Eli washed the dishes slowly, methodically. The radio hummed an old tune, something his wife used to sing while folding laundry. Across the room, Lily, his daughter, sat on the floor with crayons, her tongue poking out in concentration. Her drawing? A small house under a sky full of stars. He dried his hands, picked up the envelope. Camille Hartley, CEO, Mercer Digital ****. It hadn't just been about coffee, or a morning, or a stain. That meeting had felt surreal, like stepping into a story someone else wrote. But the way she'd looked at him, that had been real. Still, as silence settled again, doubt returned like a cold draft under a closed door. Could he do this? Could he carry the weight again? He opened the envelope. The salary was generous, enough to lift him and Lily out of survival mode. But that wasn't what made him pause. It was the note. You earned this. Not in spite of the years you stepped away, but because of how you came back. Don't doubt it, ***. No signature. Just that. He looked over at Lily. Hey, Bug, he called softly. She looked up, eyes wide. Do you remember that day I forgot your lunch, and we shared peanuts from the vending machine? She giggled. We made it a tea party at the bus stop. He smiled. Would it be okay if I started a new job? One that means I might be home a little later. But it's something I used to love. She tilted her head, thoughtful. Will you still make pancakes on Sundays? Every Sunday. She grinned. Then it's okay. He pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. Maybe, just maybe, the world had made room again. And this time, he was ready to take it. Eli Turner returned to Dalton Heights, not with a mop in hand or the creak of a janitor's cart beside him, but dressed in neatly pressed slacks and a buttoned shirt still fragrant with the faint scent of starch. A new badge hung from his chest, sleek, minimal. E. Turner, Technical Strategy Consultant. He touched it once before stepping into the elevator. As the door slid shut, he caught glimpses of familiar hallways, the ones he used to sweep, mop, polish. Faces turned, some with surprise, some with confusion. A few offered awkward smiles, unsure if they should now acknowledge him differently. It didn't matter. He hadn't returned for applause or validation. He came for a purpose. The elevator passed the floor where he used to scrub baseboards late into the night, past the closet he once organized meticulously, if only to keep his hands from shaking. And then it opened on the 22nd floor. Quiet, refined, but humming beneath the surface like an orchestra tuning just before a performance. Camille wasn't there to greet him, but a desk was already waiting in the far corner. Not lavish, functional. Dual monitors, a whiteboard half-cleaned, and a simple sticky note. No rush, but we're glad you're here. CH asterisk asterisk. He smiled, not because she tried to impress him, but because she didn't. She'd merely opened a door and let him walk through on his own. The first few days passed quietly. Eli didn't say much. He listened. People often mistook silence for passivity, but Eli knew better. Silence revealed the invisible. It exposed the seams of fear, the whispers of inefficiency, the pain points no spreadsheet ever captured. He read through outdated protocols, studied infrastructure pathways, mapped inefficiencies others had learned to live with. Quietly, methodically, thoroughly. Sometimes Camille would pass by. She never hovered, never interrupted. Once, she paused just long enough to say, "I heard about the outdated cache servers you flagged. That's been an issue for months." "They're not broken," Eli replied, "just built without thinking about who suffers when they fail." She smiled faintly. People don't usually talk about systems like they have a soul. "They don't," he said simply, "but people do, and people build them." She didn't reply, but the next morning, without fanfare, a new license had been added to his account, deeper file access, previously restricted. No memo, no announcement, just trust, extended in silence. One evening, long after the soft hum of printers had died and the city beyond the windows shimmered beneath rain-slicked streets, Eli stayed late, reviewing deployment logs from a rollout 5 years ago. A gentle knock tapped on the glass. Camille stood there, 2 steaming mugs in hand. "Chamomile," she said without preamble, setting one on his desk. She turned to leave. "Wait," he said softly. She paused. "Why me?" he asked. "Why are you doing this?" She studied him, then slowly took the chair across from him. "Because," she began, "you remind me that kindness doesn't have to shout to matter." He didn't respond. "Not yet. And because people like you," she added, "don't just fix broken systems. They quietly restore what's been lost in people's faith." He met her gaze, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not trying to be noble. I just want to do something that matters again." She nodded. "That's exactly what nobility looks like." They sipped their tea in silence, no further words, only presence. That night, as Eli stepped into the light rain and walked toward the bus stop, there was no thunderclap of transformation, no grand musical swell. But inside, something had shifted. The silence he once wore like armor now felt like space. Space not to start over, but to begin again, carrying everything he had survived. The Mercer Digital 10-year gala shimmered under chandeliers that rained gold. Crystal sparkled. Gowns flowed. Suits were tailored within an inch of perfection. And yet, amid all the dazzle, Camille hardly felt elsewhere. She stood near the glass, wine glass in hand, exchanging smiles with investors, board members, influencers. She had designed every detail of the night, the playlist, the lighting scheme, the table settings. It was, in every way, flawless. And yet, within her midnight blue gown and sculpted curls, she felt like she was performing a role she no longer belonged to. She scanned the crowd, not for validation, but for someone who hadn't arrived. Then, Like the soft final note before a chord shift, he appeared. Eli. He entered quietly through the side corridor. Black tux. No tie. Simple. Clean. The kind of man who didn't need adornment to be noticed. He adjusted his cuff slightly, eye scanning not for power, but for purpose. She saw him before he saw her. Just then, a cool breeze swept through the balcony doors. Camille instinctively crossed her arms, the open back of her dress exposed to the chill. Eli noticed. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and draped a navy shawl over her shoulders. Not ceremoniously, not theatrically, simply. "You always notice," she murmured. "I pay attention," he said, "especially when no one else does." His fingers lingered a beat too long, not in desire but in reverence. The room hushed. A final toast rang out. Fireworks were announced for the terrace. She turned to him. "Come with me." They stepped out into the cool night. The air smelled of jasmine and faint smoke. The skyline stretched endlessly before them. A red firework bloomed over the river. "I stand here every year," Camille said, her voice quieter now. "Smile for the cameras. Pretend the show means something." Another explosion, silver and blue. "This year," she added. "It actually does." He didn't speak. He let the moment hold its own gravity. "You know what I've learned lately?" she asked. "People think leadership is about control, about certainty. But I'm starting to believe it's about presence. The kind you carry." Eli turned toward her fully now. "Presence doesn't require power," he said. "It just requires that you stay long enough to really see." She looked at him. Not the title, not the resume, not the silence. Just him. The man who once handed her a napkin and never asked for recognition. "When you did that for me," she said, "it wasn't the gesture that stayed with me. It was how careful you were. Like you knew where the edge was, and you refused to cross it." "I've lived on that edge," she added. "You learn to respect it." She turned toward him, vulnerable. "Why are you always so careful?" His gaze drifted to the sky. "Because I know what it feels like when no one is careful with you." The words reached into her, past the layers of armor, past the practiced strength. She reached for his hand, not for show, not for romance, for grounding. Their fingers met, quietly, naturally. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli didn't ask why. He simply gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Always." As fireworks lit up the sky behind them, Camille didn't look back at the party, the cameras, the business. She stayed right there, a moment that finally felt real. But peace doesn't last forever. It began not with scandal, but with a leak. An internal memo marked confidential found its way into the media bloodstream. At first, it was background noise, blog headlines, analyst chatter. Then came the national spotlight. Phrases like top-down overreach, executive misalignment, and leadership failure echoed through cable panels and comment sections. By 9 a.m., Camille's inbox had caught fire. By 10:15, the board demanded an emergency session. By 10:30, she was seated at the end of a sleek glass table, surrounded by men and women who suddenly couldn't meet her eyes. The silence was sharp, calculated. Then the first stone flew. "Camille, do you have any idea how this got out? This kind of breach shakes investor trust. Wasn't this your team's responsibility?" She answered with poise, with facts, without flinching. But she felt it. The shift, the subtle lean away of colleagues, the cautious distancing that begins when the room smells smoke and everyone looks for the nearest exit. "Perhaps it's time," one board member said carefully, "to revisit leadership accountability." Her pen tightened in her hand. Not yet. She would not rise just yet. Not on their cue. And then, across the table, someone moved. Eli. He hadn't been invited to speak. Just observe. But now he leaned forward. Calm. Measured. "If we're discussing leadership," he said, "let's be accurate." Every head turned. This memo didn't come from her office, he continued. She didn't write it, didn't review it, didn't even see it. It came from a regional team already flagged twice for ignoring internal protocol. A pause. And while many in this room were still finishing their first espresso, he said, voice low but resolute. She was here at 6:30, not cleaning up a mess she made, but one she inherited. Silence deepened. Unless someone at this table has worked longer hours, skipped more family dinners, or sacrificed more this week, maybe what we need isn't a scapegoat. Maybe we need a mirror. He leaned back, and the room didn't breathe. Camille turned to him, her expression unchanged. But inside, something cracked open. Something broke and mended at once. For the first time in her long, uphill climb, someone didn't speak over her. Someone stood with her, not out of duty, but because they'd both learned what it felt like when no one else would. The quiet ones who stay. There was a long, weighted pause in the room. Then Camille finally spoke. Her voice was calm, deliberate, but it carried something new, something truer. "Thank you, Mr. Turner." A few murmurs followed. Some nodded, some scribbled meaningless notes as a smokescreen. But the current in the room had shifted permanently. She had been defended, not by another suit in the room, not by a bored ally, but by a man who once cleaned the very floors beneath their designer shoes. He hadn't done it out of loyalty. He had done it because it was right. And in a room built on polished veneers and veiled politics, truth had made the loudest sound. After the meeting, Camille lingered, gathering papers that didn't really need gathering. A ritual to stay still, to breathe in the aftermath. Eli stood by the door, quiet as always, as though waiting to ensure the room was truly empty before he spoke. When she finally looked up, her face was different, less guarded, more human. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He tilted his head slightly. "Yes, I did." She crossed her arms, not in defensiveness, but like someone trying to keep fragile things from spilling. "Why?" "Because you were alone," he answered softly, "and I know what that feels like." There it was again, that clarity he carried. Words like steel wrapped in silk. No grand speeches. Just a truth laid bare, impossible to hide from. She looked at him, really looked. Her voice dipped lower. "You really believe that's enough? Just showing up?" He stepped forward, not as a challenge, but as a presence. That's where everything begins. There was silence, long and full, the kind that breathes between two people learning not to guard themselves. Then, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders eased, not in surrender, but in permission to not carry it all, alone for once. Later that day, Camille walked the halls alone. Her heels were quieter than usual against the carpet. She paused outside the analytics wing. Through the glass, she saw Eli. He was crouched beside Mia, one of the youngest on the data team, brilliant with numbers, still green in the ways that made failure feel like collapse. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes rimmed with red. She was fighting tears the way you do when you're too afraid to let them fall. Eli didn't talk much. He didn't reach for her or touch her keyboard. He simply sat. He stayed. And when he did speak, Camille couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She recognized the cadence, the rhythm of staying. Not to fix, not to save, just to be there. She had felt it herself. That night, the city was painted in shades of rust and lavender as Camille sat in her glass-walled office, the skyline flickering outside like a living heartbeat. She opened her laptop, drafted a memo. Not a defense, not a spin, not blame repackaged as strategy. Just this. Leadership begins in quiet places, in how we show up when no one is watching. We are not perfect, but we are present, and that is where trust begins. She didn't sign it with her title, just her name. Then, after a moment of stillness, she clicked send, and for the first time that day, she allowed herself a breath that wasn't tied to survival. That evening, As Camille stepped through the marble lobby, she saw Eli at the doors, coat in hand. The air between them still glowed with the quiet truth they'd shared. "Thank you," she said again, this time softer. He met her gaze. "You already said that." "I didn't mean for the meeting," she replied. He waited. "I meant for seeing me. Not the CEO. Not the version they see. The one under the wrap. The one who sometimes forgets how to stand." He didn't smile. Instead, he said, "Then I guess we're even." She blinked. "How so?" "You saw me when I wasn't even sure I still existed." Her heart caught in her throat. The words didn't just land. They settled inside her like warmth after cold. A small, quiet smile unfolded on her lips. One she hadn't worn in far too long. This job, this world, we don't reward people who see. "No," Eli said. "That's why it matters when someone finally does." And then he walked into the night. But she didn't feel like he was walking away. She felt like, somehow, he was walking with her. It was nearly 7:15 p.m. The building had hushed into its after-hours hum, punctuated only by the distant rhythm of a printer and the soft buzz of motion sensors. Eli moved down the hallway, intending only to grab a file. But something made him pause. A muffled sound. Through the half-lit cubicle, he saw her. Mia, hunched over, a blinking red error message glowing on her screen like a silent alarm. She was trying not to cry, trying to keep her breakdown as invisible as possible. He stepped in, no fanfare, no commentary. Just a chair, pulled softly across from hers. He sat, not to take over, just to be near. "I'm fine," she said quickly, wiping her cheeks. "Looks like it," he said gently. The screen showed a formula looped endlessly, an error she had tried to fix at least 5 times. "I messed up a client report," she whispered. "It goes out tomorrow. I thought I could fix it, but..." Her voice cracked. "I don't even know what I'm doing anymore." Eli said nothing, didn't rush to correct her. He let the silence stay, let her breathe. "You think the rest of us never mess up?" he asked. She let out a bitter laugh. Please. You're always calm, like nothing shakes you." He smiled faintly. "I once pushed a bad patch to production, crashed an entire cluster. 3 days of outage, cost the company 6 figures. Her eyes widened. "You're joking." "I wish I was." "What happened?" "Someone older than me sat down and said, asterisk, you're allowed to fail. You're just not allowed to disappear." Asterisk. Mia swallowed. Her shoulders slowly eased. "So don't disappear," Eli said, voice quiet. She nodded. He pointed to the screen. "You clean up the formula. I'll double-check the logic." "You don't have to," she murmured. "I know. That's not why I'm here." For the first time that night, her hands stopped trembling. They worked together, quietly, focused. 20 minutes later, the formula aligned. The error cleared. The screen glowed green. Mia let out a breath she'd been holding all day. "Thank you," she whispered. Eli stood. "Not a rescue," he said. "Just company." From down the hallway, Camille had stopped. She had come to find him for a timeline revision, but what she saw through the glass held her still. The way he didn't correct with ego, the way he didn't lecture, the way he stayed. And she understood. This was leadership. Not the kind with applause and accolades, but the kind that says, asterisk, I'm here. Let's fix it together. Asterisk. Later that night, she caught up with him by the elevator. He held a takeout bag in one hand, probably dinner for himself and Lily. His coat was rumpled, his hair slightly disheveled from a day that had stretched longer than expected. "She's lucky you were there," Camille said softly. He shrugged. "We've all been there." She held his gaze. "You make me rethink how I lead." He raised an eyebrow. "I doubt that." She stepped a little closer. "I used to think leadership was being the first in, the last to crack, the loudest voice in the room." She trailed off. But then I saw you sit with someone who thought she was falling apart, and you didn't tell her what to do. You reminded her she wasn't alone." He said nothing. Then, gently, "Leadership doesn't start with power. It starts with presence." Those words wrapped around her like warmth in winter. "You sound like someone who's practiced that line." "No," he said. "I've just lived the opposite." Later that night, he offered her a ride home. Her car was in the shop, and she accepted, not out of need, but because she wanted the quiet of his company. Inside the car, a soft instrumental track played, wordless, but somehow full of meaning. Camille leaned back, her body finally unwinding. "You were right," she murmured. Eli glanced at her. "About what?" "You don't have to say much to change something for someone." He smiled slightly. "Neither do you." She turned toward him. "You notice more than people think." He looked forward again. "I used to miss things. Now I try not to." She didn't reply. Her eyes grew heavier, and the rhythm of the road lulled her toward sleep. At the next red light, Eli turned. She had dozed off, her head tilted toward the window. A strand of hair clung to her cheek. He reached out, hand hovering, then gently brushed it away. Her eyes fluttered open. She didn't move, didn't speak. Their eyes met. He began, pulling his hand back. "Sorry. Your hair." She didn't look away. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was softer than the music. She watched him, like someone seeing something she'd tried not to want. The light turned green, but neither of them rushed to move forward, because in that quiet car, on a street like any other, something extraordinary had begun, not with declarations, but with presence. The next morning, Camille sat by her window, coffee untouched. The memory of that car ride echoed in her chest, not as a fantasy, but as something sacred, not spoken, but known. She opened her laptop, typed a sentence she'd written, deleted, rewritten 3 times. Leadership is the art of. For years, she'd filled in that blank with vision, decisiveness, strategy. But none of those words were true anymore. Not after watching Eli sit with Mia. Not after hearing him defend her when no one else did. Not after the way he'd brushed her hair aside like it was something rare. This time, she wrote, "Leadership is the art of seeing without assumption, staying without agenda, and speaking only when your words carry care." She paused, then hit save. Later that afternoon, she and Eli found themselves walking the hallway again, side by side. She scrolled through her tablet absently, glancing at performance metrics, but her eyes kept drifting toward him. "You're quiet today," Eli observed. "I'm thinking," she replied. "About." She stopped walking, lowered her tablet, and looked at him. "You." He raised a brow, surprised, amused. "That direct, huh?" She smiled. "I'm learning to skip the part where we pretend we're not already thinking the same thing." He chuckled, low and unforced, like a wind chime catching a faint breeze. "All right, I'll bite. What about me?" Camille tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her posture still elegant, but softer now. "Real. I used to believe leadership meant forging ahead, always out front, always poised, heart hidden, head down, 2 steps ahead of the fall. But then," she said, voice thinning into something more vulnerable, "I watched you sit beside someone who was unraveling, and you didn't fix her. You didn't control the moment, you shared it." Eli's brow furrowed gently, the way someone does when they've heard something unexpected and strangely familiar. It didn't feel like leadership. "That's because it wasn't," she said. "It was human. That's what made it powerful." They stood in the corridor, surrounded by the gentle chaos of office life. Doors opening, keyboards clacking, voices passing by. But it all faded into the background. "You know," she added, a breath catching behind her words, "for all the noise in this place, the quiet things have changed it most." Eli's eyes found hers. Maybe that's because quiet is where truth hides. She looked at him then, not with professional courtesy, not even with admiration, but with something deeper. The gaze of someone who had been changed not by grand gestures, but by steady presence. "You're not just here to help us build better systems," she whispered. "You're here to help us remember why we build them." He held her gaze, steady, unwavering. "And you're not just here to lead this company," he replied. "You're here to remind everyone it's still made of people." She smiled, but it wasn't carefree. There was ache in it, too. "I've spent so long being efficient that I forgot how to be available." "Then it's a good thing someone reminded you," he said. She tilted her head slightly, curiosity now shadowing her expression. "And what reminded you?" His eyes drifted toward the window, following something unseen. "Loss," he said softly. "Losing everything strips away the noise. It leaves you with only what matters. You stop chasing applause and start choosing presence." Camille didn't speak. She just nodded, as though every syllable had found its mark. Later that afternoon, Eli led his first major strategy session. Senior executives, division heads, tech directors, a room used to authority, used to presentations wrapped in polish and posturing. But Eli stood there in a charcoal blazer, no tie, sleeves slightly rumpled, utterly himself. He pulled up a schematic and began. "We've been optimizing for efficiency," he said, "which is fine, until you start measuring people the same way you measure bandwidth." A ripple of raised eyebrows moved across the room. "We can trim redundancies, streamline systems. That's not hard. What's harder, but more important, is building infrastructure that supports human rhythm, not idealized behavior. Real people." He switched to a heat map. "This setup assumes perfection. But when something breaks, it doesn't stay technical. It becomes personal. It erodes trust, delays connection, creates pressure. So let's stop designing like failure is the exception. Let's start designing like compassion is the default." The room didn't argue. It absorbed. From the back, Camille watched. When he finished, she stood. No preamble. No performative praise. "I read his file," she said. "But more importantly, I read between the lines." She turned to the room. "And today, so did you." Then, facing Eli directly, her voice soft, but resolute, "I chose right." Silence hung reverent. Then the applause came. Not loud, not performative, just honest. Eli didn't beam. He nodded quietly, collected his notes, and sat. But inside, something unfurled like light slipping beneath a closed door. That night, Camille sat alone in her office. The city buzzed below like it always did, but her world, for once, was still. She didn't feel exhausted. She felt aligned, like something missing had finally returned, not in a flash, but in the shape of a man who knew how to sit with people in their breaking, and remind them it didn't make them broken. She opened her notebook and wrote, "The best leaders don't move ahead of us. They move with us, step by step, breath by breath." She underlined it twice, then turned out the light. Across the city, Eli sat at his kitchen table, helping Lily with her homework. The night was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, they both felt like they were no longer walking alone. It was the kind of afternoon that tasted like endings. The sky was overcast, the drizzle steady, painting long silver trails down the glass walls of Mercer Tower. Inside, the building buzzed too loudly, the kind of hum that held unease. Camille stood at the edge of the executive floor, facing a door she had never opened. Not once in 10 years. Her father's office. Everyone assumed it was a storage room now, a relic. But to Camille, it had been a tomb. And today, for the first time, she held the key, not made of brass, but carved from grief and healing. Eli had noticed her change days ago. The way she lingered longer in silences. The way her gaze found that door like it was calling her. He never asked. Today, she approached him. "Would you come with me?" Her voice was steady, but hushed. "Of course," he said. The key clicked with a sound that echoed too loudly in her chest. The room smelled like cedar and thyme. Nothing had moved. The desk, the photos, the framed accolades, the ghost, a picture on the wall, Camille, braces and teenage pride, standing beside her father at the company's ribbon-cutting ceremony. Eli stayed back, let her have the space, but he didn't leave. "He built this from nothing," she whispered. "And you carried it further," Eli said. She didn't respond, just stared at the photograph. "People think I became who I am because of him," she said slowly. "But really, I became who I am trying to deserve what he left behind." She turned to face Eli. Her eyes didn't shine. They held storms. "Every sacrifice I made, every sleepless night, I was building something I didn't even know how to feel part of. I told myself I had to be hard. That softness was weakness. That presence was dangerous." Eli watched her, not with pity, with reverence. "And then," she continued, "I met a man who ran toward vulnerability without asking anything in return, who stayed beside people in their mess, not to fix them, but to honor their pain." Eli's throat tightened. "You changed the way I understand power," Camille said. "You reminded me it's not what we hold, it's what we share." Her voice trembled. "And I'm terrified of what I feel when I'm near you." He stepped forward, words quiet as breath. "Then we're both terrified, but we're not alone in it." She laughed, short, cracked, raw. "You always know the right thing to say." "No," he said. "I just say the real thing. That's all I've got." She moved closer. "What if I don't know how to be soft without breaking?" He reached up slowly, asking with his eyes before letting his fingertips touch her cheek. "Then I'll be the hand that steadies you." And in that stillness, she let go, not of strength, but of solitude. That evening, a private dinner was held in the rooftop atrium. Not for press, not for pageantry, just the leadership team and a handful of trusted guests. Camille hadn't planned to speak, but when the room quieted and all eyes found her, she stood. No script, no notes. "There was a time I thought being CEO meant being the strongest in the room," she said. "The one who never faltered, never needed, never asked." The room stilled. "But I've learned real leadership isn't about never breaking. It's about showing up anyway, with presence, with care, with enough attention to say, 'I see you.'" Her eyes swept across the room. "We'll make mistakes. We'll get tired. But if we lead with care, even when it's inconvenient, then we're not just building a company. We're building something worth remembering." Applause followed, not thunderous, but whole. Eli stood at the edge of the room, watching. She didn't see him, but she felt him. Later, she found him alone on the terrace, leaning into the skyline. She joined him in silence. After a while, he said, "You sounded like someone who finally believes they belong." She nodded, "Because someone finally stood still long enough for me to hear the echo." He looked at her. "And what do you hear now?" She turned toward him, her eyes aglow with something that felt like home. "That I'm not building this alone anymore." She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old brass compass, tarnished, but sturdy. It was my father's. He said it always brought him back to where he belonged. She held it out. "Now I want you to have it." Eli blinked. "Camille, it's not a gift," she said. "It's a promise that no matter where this leads, we'll keep finding our way, together." He took it, not because he needed direction, but because it meant he was part of her map. The first snow arrived without ceremony. No wind, no warning, just a hush that softened everything it touched. Outside Mercer Tower, the world moved slower. Inside, the warmth glowed from desk lamps and half-lit screens. And in Camille's office on the 28th floor, something had changed. The glass walls were still there. So was the desk, the skyline. But the room no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a life, a little messy, a little human. And at the center of it all, Camille sat cross-legged on the floor. Home. They sat cross-legged on the carpeted floor. Camille Mercer and young Lily Turner, a pair not bound by blood, but by something far deeper. Between them lay 2 mugs of steaming cocoa, their surfaces flecked with half-melted marshmallows and a scattered mosaic of faded photographs across their laps. "Is that really your dad?" Lily asked, holding up a glossy photo. It was Camille's father, stoic in stature, mustache sharp like punctuation, standing next to a teenaged Camille, who beamed with braces and the awkward confidence of youth. Camille chuckled, the sound rising from someplace tender. "Yep, he kept that mustache for most of my childhood. I used to think he looked like a detective." Lily tilted the picture sideways, squinting. "He kind of does. But you look different. Less serious." Camille tilted her head, thoughtful. "I think I was," she said softly, more to herself than to Lily. The child studied her for a second longer, the kind of gaze only children dare to hold, curious, honest, free of pretense. "You're not as scary as people say, you know." Camille raised an eyebrow in playful offense. "People say I'm scary. Mr. Harris said you once fired a guy just by looking at him." Camille burst into laughter. "He actually quit. But yes, I may have worn more eyeliner back then." Lily giggled, leaning in conspiratorially. "I like this you better." Camille smiled, small but real, kind of smile that echoes deeper than the lips. "So do I." Just then, the office door creaked open, letting in a draft of winter and a man dusted in snow. Eli Turner, cheeks flushed with cold, stood still at the threshold, as if afraid to disturb something sacred. He took in the scene, his daughter and Camille, hands sticky with marshmallow, laughter floating like warmth into the chilled room. "Sorry," he said, clearing his throat. "Didn't mean to interrupt." Camille rose, brushing crumbs from her jeans. "You're not." He gave her a long, quiet look, the kind that asked no questions, but said everything. "I brought the pie," he offered. "The good one." Lily sprang up, eyes wide. "Pan made?" "Still warm." "Still warm," he confirmed. She bolted toward him, snatching the foil-wrapped pie from his hands with the reverence usually reserved for treasure. "You're officially the best dad ever," she declared and disappeared toward the kitchenette. Now it was just the 2 of them. Camille stepped closer, heart beating like a soft drum inside a quiet cathedral. Eli looked around the office. "This place feels different." "So do I," she whispered, and in the golden hush that stretched between them, years of loneliness, of silent hope, of invisible healing, she let her truth rise. "You could have gone anywhere," she murmured. "You had offers. Offers from companies I used to lose sleep over." He nodded. "True, but none of them had Lily." Her breath caught. "Or me." He stepped closer, his voice falling to a register reserved for honesty. "Are you sure?" she asked, the words trembling like the flame of a candle too long left unattended. "About this, about us." Eli's eyes didn't waver. "Camille, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You don't scare me. Not the title. Not the past. Not even the eyeliner." She laughed, a real, unfiltered laugh that cracked at the edges. "What about the future?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the compass she had given him weeks ago. Still slightly tarnished, still unwavering in its direction. "Whatever path this thing points to," he said, "I'm walking it with you." Her eyes brimmed, not with fear now, but with recognition. "You always know what to say." "No," he said, cupping her cheek in his palm. "I just say the truth. That's all I've ever known with you." That evening, they stepped out into the world not as 2 people navigating the edges of each other's lives, but as one, steady whole. Snow drifted like lace from the sky. Lily, emboldened by pie and joy, lobbed a snowball square at Eli's back. With perfect aim, he retaliated. Laughter exploded between them. Camille's the loudest of all, full and unguarded, scattering years of sorrow like snow on pavement. They walked 3 blocks to a modest diner tucked beneath a flickering neon sign. Not the kind of place you made reservations for, but the kind where the waitress knew your name and the pie came with a wink. In a booth warmed by shared fries and too many stories, Lily told Camille about a dream where her dad had married Wonder Woman. "Close enough," Camille replied. Eli shook his head. "Don't tell her that. She'll start wearing a cape to work." The waitress brought cocoa without being asked. For a long, unmeasured while, joy showed up in small ways, through melted marshmallows, crinkled napkins, and glances that didn't need explanation. Healing wore no grandeur that night. It looked like this. Weeks later, Camille stood before a small crowd gathered in a school gymnasium for a fundraiser. She wasn't wearing her signature heels or her armor of sharp tailoring. Instead, she wore jeans and a soft blue sweater. In her hand was a check large enough to fund 6 new classrooms. But that wasn't the only thing she brought. She brought space. Space for single parents barely treading water. For working mothers who missed PTA meetings but never missed bedtime. For janitors like Eli once was. Those who swept what others left behind with dignity no one ever saw. She spoke not from a stage, but from a place of truth. When she finished, she saw him at the back, Eli, holding Lily's coat, eyes steady, gaze never leaving her. That night, back home, they curled into the warmth of the couch. Camille rested her head against his shoulder, while Lily, now fast asleep, held a half-open book in her lap. Outside, the snow twirled. Inside, only peace remained. Camille whispered into the hush, "Do you think we'll make it?" Eli kissed the top of her head, his answer as steady as his soul. "We already did." And as the night deepened and the city slowed, the camera of life pulled quietly back. From the apartment aglow with a warm lamp in the window, from the 3 hearts wrapped in quiet belonging, from the love that didn't announce itself, but simply was. It wasn't about being saved. It was about being seen, wholly, deeply, quietly, and loved anyway. And now it's your turn. Where in the world are you joining us from? Was there a moment in this story that spoke directly to your heart? Drop a comment below and share your reflections. If even a small part of the story stirred something in you, hope, healing, or just a breath of softness, please consider subscribing. Because every week, another story waits, and it might just be the one someone out there needs to hear. Until next time, stay kind, stay human, and keep believing in the quiet power of presence.